In what ways do Alien 1979 and Get Out 2017 use key conventions of the horror genre, such as isolation, the intrusion of the uncanny, and the violation of the body, to expose and critique institutionalized oppression? Both Alien and Get Out use and twist the core conventions of horror, such as confinement, the uncanny home, and bodily violation, to show how oppression hides inside normal parts of society. To explore these ideas, I will focus on how Ridley Scott and Jordan Peele manipulate cinematic techniques such as camera movement, framing, mise-en-scene, lighting, and sound design to construct horror that reflects a deeper social critique. For example, Scott's use of darkness, industrial textures, and claustrophobic camera work, which Alien evokes in a dehumanizing corporate space, while Peele's bright suburban aesthetic and steady camera in Get Out masks the underlying violence and hypocrisy. In both films, the visual contrast is used to expose the lie of the privileged American ideal. Through this analysis, I will consider each film's historical and cultural context, ranging from the late 1970s corporate anxieties to the 2010s racial tensions that informs the fear and power structures represented on screen, transforming survival into a symbolic act of resistance against institutionalized oppression. The research question came from an interest in how horror as a genre functions not only as a means of entertainment, but also a cinematic mirror that reflects social anxieties and systemic oppression. Both Alien and Get Out are key examples of how filmmakers can employ horror conventions such as claustrophobic spaces, bodily invasion, and the uncanny to represent different and difficult forms of domination. Ridley Scott's Alien highlights the corporate and patriarchal fears that shaped the late 1970s Western society. The film's horror mainly comes from the constant sense of being trapped, the fear of the body being taken over, and the transformation of the human body into a place of violation and control. The films critique the patriarchal hierarchies by turning the final girl trope figure, which is Ellie Ripley, into the moral and physical survivor who challenges male authority and redefines the strengths and the leadership in a world dominated by men and industrial systems. Jordan Peele's Get Out reinterprets these same tropes to expose the exploration of black bodies in a world that pretends to be post-racial, where the white gaze becomes the site of terror. These films represent significant shifts in the history of the horror genre. Alien is academically important because it challenges traditional patriarchal hierarchies by turning the final girl trope figure into the moral and physical survivor who challenges male authority and redefines strength and leadership in a world dominated by men and industrial systems. Although the final girl trope was not formally named until Carol J. Clover's analysis in Men, Women, and Chainsaws made in 1992. Its early patterns were already present during the late 1970s horror cinema. For example, Get Out is equally significant because it marks a breakthrough in how cinema critiques the myth of a post-racial America through the lens of psychological horror. This comparison allows for an analysis of how film language such as lighting, sound, and framing acts as a tool to expose power dynamics that are usually kept hidden within an industrial system. Alien reflects the rise of second-wave feminism and growing distrust of the corporate authority following the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. It breaks away from the earlier traditions where women were portrayed as passive victims, instead giving us Ellen Ripley, who survives through intelligence and discipline in a male-dominated industrial world. The Nostromo itself, it's a metaphor for a decaying industrial society, where the individual is worth less than the profit of the company. Ridley Scott's Alien suggests and highlights the corporate and patriarchal fears that shaped the late 1970s Western society. On the other hand, Get Out emerged during a time of national reckoning with systemic racism and the collapse of the post-racial myth after the Obama era. The horror here is not a monster from space, but the smiling faces of white liberals. As Huck's 1992 suggests, the white gaze can be a site of terror for black subjects. Paley uses the setting of a normal civil family to show how racism persists in subtle polite forms providing that being liberal does not mean you can't be part of a predatory system that commodifies black excellence. In both films, the environment is used to express a sense of entrapment within a system. In Alien, the Nostromo is a physical embodiment of the corporate confinement. Its narrow corridors, dark pipes, and low ceilings create a space where control is built into the architecture. A key scene to analyze is the quarantine protocol scene, when Ripley refuses to let the infected crew back onto the ship. She is following the rules, but the men overrule her. Scott uses a frame within a frame here, trapping Ripley behind a small glass window. This visual barrier represents the glass ceiling, which is mentioned in Clover 1992. She has the facts and the logic, but she lacks the institutional permission to lead. Get Out challenges this by using wide, bright, and perfect spaces to create a different kind of psychological confinement. The Armygate house uses a warm, neutral color palette as a form of visual camouflage for the violence beneath the surface. Chris is often placed off-center or reflected in windows, which makes him look like he is on display, as isolated within a world that looks welcoming but is actually a trap. During the garden party scene, Peely uses long shots to show Chris surrounded by white guests. The openness of the lawn actually makes him feel more exposed. As Hooks 2000 notes, class and race often intersect to create environments where the marginalized are made to feel like guests in their own lives. Both directors use the uncanny, the feeling of familiar things becoming dangerous, to expose systems of control. Scott uses low zooms and long takes to force the audience to look at the xenomorph, which Giger designed to be a disturbing mix of biological and mechanical parts, by Giger and Keller 1997. The chestburster scene is a masterclass in editing. The fast cuts and frantic camera movements reflect the total chaos of losing bodily control. The silence of space contrasted with the industrial screeches of the ship creates an uncanny atmosphere where the environment itself feels hostile. Peely finds the uncanny in human behavior, like Georgina's rehearsed politeness. In the No 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 scene, a long close-up traps the audience inside her mask. A single tear falls while she keeps smiling. We see the breach between her forced identity and the internal torture she is feeling. The use of sound, the clicking of the teaspoon, becomes a weapon of hypnotic control, turning a domestic ritual into a psychological prison. The sunken place itself is a masterpiece of framing, showing how Chris falling into a void while the world above becomes a tiny, unreachable screen, perfectly capturing the feeling of being silenced by a system. Neither films has a traditional hero. Instead, they show characters fighting to get their identity back from a system. Ripley's arc is defined by her rational decision-making and discipline. By the end of the film, when she is in the escape shuttle, her vulnerability is actually a symbol of her resistance. She has stripped away the corporate uniform and the company identity. She survives because she refuses to be silenced or panicked by the patriarchal system. As Williams 1996 explains, the body horror genre uses the moments of physical vulnerability to force the audience to emphasize with the struggle for autonomy. Chris's arc is a struggle against racial erasure. When he is strapped to the chair in the basement, he is at his most vulnerable, facing the literal death of self. However, he uses cotton from the chair to plug his ears. This is a powerful visual metaphor. He is literally using the symbol of historical slavery, which is cotton, to pluck out the modern sound of his own oppression, which is the hypnotic spoon. His escape is chaotic and instinctive, reflecting a reality where survival under systemic racism is never fair or calm. Unlike Ripley, who follows a plan, Chris has to fight through a world that has been rigged against him from the start. The final confrontation in both films proved that the system is the ultimate monster. Both endings show survival as an act of reclaiming identity. Ripley resists patriarchal control, and Chris resists racial erasure. However, both films end with the truth that escape does not mean total freedom. In Alien, Ripley is left drifting in sleep, still part of a universe controlled by the company that tried to kill her. In Get Out, the police siren at the end reminds us that the institutional system, represented by the police, is still a threat. This horror stays with the audience, forcing us to question the structure we live in and what it costs to survive within the system. Survival isn't just about killing the monster, it's about remaining yourself in a world that wants to consume you.